What if the most expensive part of visiting New York is not the hotel, not the flight, not even the food, but something you never see listed anywhere? What if the city drains money long before you realize it, through mechanisms so normalized that most visitors never question them? New York sells itself as a promise, a city of movies, ambition, culture, opportunity, energy. For decades, films, series, social media, and travel marketing have repeated the same image. Walkable streets full of life, iconic skylines, endless possibilities packed into a few square miles. But behind this carefully curated image exists a parallel system, one that quietly extracts value from anyone who steps into the city without resistance. And tourists are its easiest targets. The illusion begins even before arrival. You think you are paying for a trip, but in reality, you are entering an ecosystem designed to monetize confusion, urgency, and unfamiliarity. Nothing feels like a fee. Nothing feels like a tax. Everything feels normal, and that is precisely the problem. New York does not drain visitors through obvious charges. It drains them through silence. Every interaction becomes a transaction layered with invisible costs. The city is structured to turn movement, time, comfort, and even mistakes into revenue streams. You are not just visiting New York, you are being processed by it. And the system works because it never announces itself. It hides behind convenience, speed, and the fear of missing out. Visitors arrive with excitement, already mentally prepared to spend more than usual. That mindset is crucial. When expectations are high and time is limited, resistance drops. You accept prices you would never tolerate at home. You say yes faster, you question less, and New York knows this. The city thrives on short-term presence and long-term extraction. What makes this especially unsettling is that most of these costs are not scams. They are legal, institutionalized, and culturally accepted. They exist in plain sight, yet remain unnoticed because each one on its own seems small. It is only later, when you look at the final numbers, that something feels wrong. The trip cost far more than expected, but you struggle to pinpoint exactly why. This is not accidental. It is structural. New York has evolved into a city that survives by quietly transferring financial pressure onto those least prepared to understand its rules. Visitors are ideal. They lack context. They lack local shortcuts. They lack time to adapt, and the city capitalizes on that gap relentlessly. The real price of visiting New York is not printed on any booking page. It is distributed across dozens of silent tariffs, embedded into daily actions and justified by the myth that this is simply how the city works. Once you start noticing them, the entire experience changes. What once felt exciting begins to feel calculated. And the most disturbing part is that this system does not start in Times Square or Manhattan restaurants. It starts the moment you land, when the city welcomes you with a smile and opens the first invisible toll gate. If this opening already changed the way you see New York, pause for a moment and think about your own experience. Most people feel something is off during the trip, but they cannot explain it. Understanding how the city quietly drains money is the first step to seeing the system clearly, instead of blaming yourself for spending too much. That is why your engagement here matters. When you leave a comment, you are not just interacting with the video, you are forcing this conversation into the open. Write what you felt in New York, or simply comment, "I felt this," if the description resonates with you. Your perspective helps expose what is usually hidden. If this analysis makes sense to you, leaving a like tells the algorithm that this kind of content deserves visibility. And if you want to keep understanding the real mechanisms behind urban illusions, consider subscribing. This channel exists to break the surface narrative and reveal what cities like New York actually cost, financially and psychologically. The first silent tariff does not wait for Times Square, Broadway, or a hotel check-in. It hits you the moment you arrive, when you are tired, disoriented, and mentally unprepared to resist. Airports in New York are not neutral gateways. They are engineered environments designed to extract money efficiently from people who just want to move forward. After hours in a plane, your priority is speed and clarity, not analysis. And this is exactly where the system activates. Transportation options appear abundant, but each path is layered with friction, confusion, and hidden premiums. Official taxis feel safer than alternatives. Ride apps surge without warning. Airport fees, congestion charges, tolls, and local surcharges quietly stack on top of each other. None of them feel dramatic. Together, they are devastating. Signage rarely explains the full cost. You see base prices, not final totals. You see convenience framed as necessity. By the time you understand what you paid, the transaction is already done, and the city has taken its first cut. This is not accidental design. Airports are pressure zones, where fatigue replaces skepticism and urgency overrides calculation. Even seemingly small decisions become expensive under stress. Buying water, grabbing food, exchanging currency, using charging stations, accessing Wi-Fi alternatives. Everything costs more, and every price feels justified because you are already there. New York airports normalize premium pricing so early that your internal spending baseline shifts upward before you even reach the city. Then comes the psychological component. You tell yourself it is temporary, just airport prices, just the first day. But this moment quietly sets the tone for the entire trip. You begin accepting inflated costs as part of the experience. Resistance weakens. The city is training you. What makes this especially effective is fragmentation. No single charge feels outrageous. It is the accumulation that matters. A small airport access fee, a higher than expected ride, a mandatory service add-on. Each one is defensible on its own. Together, they establish a pattern that repeats everywhere else. And here is the deeper issue. Airports are no longer infrastructure built to serve movement. They are monetization hubs. In New York, they function as the first filter, separating visitors who will absorb costs without complaint from those who will feel financial pressure for the rest of the trip. Once you pass through, the city knows you are already invested. Most visitors never revisit these early charges mentally. They fade into the background, overshadowed by landmarks and photos. But they matter. They shape decisions later. They make the next overpayment easier to accept. By the time you realize how much you have spent, you are already deep inside the system. This is how New York begins draining visitors without confrontation, without warning, and without resistance. Quietly, methodically, starting at the gate. The second silent tariff reveals itself when you finally think you are safe, settled, and done paying the big bills. You have a hotel, a room, a key card, a sense of arrival. But this is exactly where New York becomes more precise, because accommodation in the city is no longer about providing shelter. It is about charging for existence. Hotels in New York mastered the art of separating the advertised price from the real price. What you see when you book is only an entry point, a psychological anchor designed to feel manageable. The real extraction begins later, through layers of charges that feel administrative, inevitable, and non-negotiable. Resort fees, facility fees, destination fees, service charges, taxes stacked on top of taxes, none of them optional, none of them avoidable once you commit. What makes these fees especially effective is timing. They rarely appear upfront in a way that triggers rejection. They surface after you have invested emotionally and logistically in the trip. Canceling feels impossible. Arguing feels pointless. The system relies on your exhaustion, your schedule, and your desire not to disrupt the experience. Even budget hotels participate. Even short stays are affected, and the logic is always the same. You are not paying more for quality. You are paying for access. For location. For permission to occupy space in a city that treats space as a scarce commodity to be monetized relentlessly. Then come the micro-extractions. Early check-in, late check-out, holding luggage, printing documents, using the gym. Even storing a bag for a few hours becomes a paid service. These are not luxury upgrades. They are basic human conveniences turned into revenue streams. The message is subtle but consistent. Comfort costs extra. Time costs extra. Flexibility costs extra. Psychologically, this creates a trap. Once you have accepted the initial hidden fees, you become less sensitive to the next ones. You start rationalizing. It is just a few dollars more. It is normal here. It is New York. And the city thrives on that internal dialogue. Each justification lowers your defenses further. The deeper issue is not the amount of any single fee. It is the normalization of constant financial leakage. Money leaves your account in small, steady increments, often, without immediate emotional impact. But by the end of the stay, the total is shocking. And yet, when you try to explain it later, the explanation sounds weak. Nothing dramatic happened. You were not scammed. You simply paid what was asked. This is how the system protects itself. By avoiding obvious abuse, it avoids backlash. By spreading costs across dozens of moments, it avoids awareness. Hotels become quiet collaborators in a city-wide extraction model, one that treats visitors not as guests, but as temporary assets. And this matters because accommodation is supposed to be the foundation of stability during travel. When even rest becomes conditional and expensive, everything else feels more urgent, more pressured, more rushed. The city accelerates you, and acceleration always benefits the one collecting the tolls. Transportation in New York appears simple on the surface. Subways, buses, taxis, ride apps, walking. The city markets itself as connected, efficient, accessible. But beneath that image exists another silent tariff, one that operates through fragmentation and mental overload. Movement in New York is never just movement. It is a sequence of small financial concessions that add up faster than most visitors realize. The subway looks cheap compared to other options, but it quietly trains you to accept constant spending. Swipe after swipe. Miss a train, swipe again. Take the wrong line, swipe again. Stations without clear signage force last-minute decisions. Transfers that feel intuitive on a map become confusing underground. Each mistake costs money, time, and energy. And when fatigue sets in, you abandon the cheap option and default to more expensive ones. Taxis and ride apps exploit this moment perfectly. Prices fluctuate without explanation. Surge pricing appears when demand spikes, which in New York is almost always. Congestion fees, tolls, airport access charges, and city-specific surcharges layer themselves invisibly onto the final number. You rarely see the full cost until after the ride ends. At that point, it is already normalized. You tell yourself it was necessary. You needed to get there. Walking, often promoted as the free alternative, carries its own hidden cost. Distances are longer than they appear. Crowds slow everything down. Noise, stress, and constant decision-making drain mental energy. Eventually, convenience wins again. And convenience in New York is always monetized. What makes this system so effective is choice, overload. The city presents many transportation options, but none of them are clean, predictable, or truly affordable over time. You are constantly switching methods, recalculating, adapting. That mental friction pushes you toward the path of least resistance, not the path of least cost. This creates a pattern. Short rides become long expenses. Small delays trigger expensive decisions. What starts as a plan to use the subway most of the time turns into a series of compromises that quietly inflate the trip's total cost. You do not feel robbed. You feel rushed. The deeper layer is psychological. New York conditions visitors to believe that efficiency is more valuable than money. Saving time feels like winning. But every shortcut has a price, and the city knows exactly how much urgency you can tolerate before you pay it. Transportation becomes a constant negotiation between stress and spending, and the city profits either way. By the end of the trip, many visitors realize they spent far more moving around than expected, yet struggle to explain how. No single ride stands out. No single fare feels outrageous. The cost disappears into the rhythm of the city, just like everything else. Food in New York is sold as culture, identity, experience. Every street promises something iconic. Every neighborhood claims authenticity. Every menu tells a story. But behind this narrative sits one of the most efficient silent tariffs in the city, because eating is unavoidable, repetitive, and emotionally charged. And New York has learned how to monetize all three. The first trap is perception. Prices rarely look extreme at first glance. A sandwich seems reasonable. A coffee feels normal. A simple meal appears manageable. But the moment you sit down, layers begin to surface. Taxes that were not included. Mandatory gratuities quietly added. Service fees justified by vague language. Suggested tips calibrated to push you upward. By the time the check arrives, the price no longer matches the menu you remember reading. This system thrives on fragmentation. You do not feel the cost because it arrives in pieces. Breakfast here, lunch there, snacks in between, late-night food when exhaustion lowers resistance. Each transaction feels small enough to ignore, but food repeats every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And repetition is where the extraction becomes powerful. Tourists are especially vulnerable because food is tied to experience. You are not just eating. You are trying New York. That emotional framing disables caution. You accept prices you would reject anywhere else because you believe the moment justifies it. The city encourages this mindset relentlessly, branding ordinary meals as must-have experiences. Then comes the pressure of pace. Long days, constant walking, overstimulation. Hunger hits harder and faster. When it does, decision quality drops. You choose what is nearby, not what is reasonable. You pay to avoid waiting. You pay to sit. You pay to stay warm or cool. Convenience quietly replaces value. Even fast food participates. Portions shrink, prices rise, customization costs extra. Add-ons stack without friction. What once felt like a budget option becomes another drain. And because food expenses feel personal, not structural, visitors blame themselves instead of recognizing the system at work. The psychological toll is subtle, but real. When basic nourishment becomes expensive, every other expense feels heavier. You start rationing mentally, you skip meals, you compromise quality, or you overspend and carry guilt. Either way, the city wins. Stress increases, awareness decreases. By the end of the trip, many visitors realize food consumed far more of their budget than planned. Yet when they look back, they remember moments, not numbers. A slice here, a drink there, a dinner that felt special. The cost dissolves into memory, which is exactly how New York keeps this tariff invisible. After transportation and food, the next silent tariff disguises itself as pleasure. Experiences, attractions, moments you are told you cannot miss. New York does not just sell places to see. It sells the fear of leaving without having truly lived the city. And that fear is incredibly profitable. Everywhere you turn, the city frames consumption as participation. Observation decks, museums, shows, pop-up exhibits, immersive installations, guided tours. Each one presented as essential, limited, or once in a lifetime. Prices are rarely shocking on their own. It is the accumulation that matters. One ticket here, one upgrade there, priority access to avoid lines. Audio guides, convenience bundles. The city converts curiosity into a payment funnel. What makes this tariff especially effective is emotional timing. You are already spending. You are already committed. You are already telling yourself this trip is special. Saying no begins to feel like wasting the opportunity. So you say yes, even when something feels overpriced, because the alternative feels like regret. New York reinforces this constantly. Signs say, last chance. Apps say, only a few tickets left. Influencers say, you have to do this. The city weaponizes urgency and social pressure to collapse decision time. And when decisions are rushed, prices stop mattering. Even free attractions carry hidden costs. Time spent waiting. Transportation to reach them. Nearby food inflated by location. Merchandise at exits designed to catch you. Emotionally softened by the experience. You may not pay to enter, but you pay to exist there. The deeper layer is psychological exhaustion. After days of constant stimulation, your ability to evaluate value weakens. You are surrounded by noise, crowds, movement, and choice. In that state, packaged experiences feel safe. Someone else plans it. Someone else decides. You just pay and follow. New York understands this fatigue and sells relief disguised as entertainment. This is where the illusion tightens. You believe you are choosing joy. In reality, you are being guided through monetized pathways optimized for visitors who do not return often. The city does not need long-term satisfaction. It needs short-term extraction. What makes this silent tariff difficult to confront is that experiences create memories, and memories justify spending retroactively. You look back and say, it was worth it, even if the cost strained you. That emotional payoff protects the system from criticism. You do not complain about something that made you feel alive. But when you step back, a pattern emerges. New York has transformed experience itself into infrastructure. The city no longer supports daily life as its primary function. It supports consumption cycles. Visitors are encouraged to compress meaning into paid moments, and the city collects at every compression point. By the time the trip ends, many visitors realize they paid not just for access, but for permission to feel something. And permission in New York is never free. By this point, something subtle has already shifted inside the visitor. Spending no longer feels like a series of choices. It feels like a reaction. And this is where one of the most damaging silent tariffs takes hold, not on the wallet directly, but on the mind. New York charges a psychological fee for existing at its pace, and that fee quietly pushes people into worse financial decisions. The city moves fast, relentlessly. Noise never stops. Crowds never thin. Time feels compressed. You are constantly navigating people, schedules, signals, warnings, and interruptions. This state of permanent alert has a cost. Cognitive fatigue, decision exhaustion, emotional overload. And when the brain is overwhelmed, it seeks shortcuts. In that condition, you stop optimizing. You stop comparing. You stop resisting. You choose whatever ends the moment of friction fastest. That usually means spending more. Paying for the closest option. Paying to skip a line. Paying to avoid thinking. New York understands this perfectly. The city is designed so that stress makes spending feel like relief. This is not accidental. Urban density, noise levels, crowd flow, signage clutter, even lighting all contribute to a background state of pressure. Visitors feel it but rarely name it. They say the city is intense. They say it is energizing. But intensity is not neutral. It erodes patience. And when patience disappears, prices lose meaning. This psychological drain creates a feedback loop. The more overwhelmed you feel, the more you spend to regain control. The more you spend, the more pressure you feel to justify the trip. And justification leads to more spending. The city feeds on this loop quietly, efficiently, without ever appearing hostile. What makes this tariff invisible is that it feels personal. You think you are tired because you walked too much. You think you overspent because you wanted comfort. You do not realize that the environment itself is pushing you toward those decisions. The system disappears behind your own explanations. Even moments of rest are monetized. Cafes charge more for seating. Quiet spaces are rare or paid. Comfort becomes a premium feature. And once comfort has a price, exhaustion becomes profitable. New York does not just sell products. It sells relief from itself. By the end of the trip, many visitors feel drained in ways they cannot fully articulate. Not just financially, but mentally. They remember being rushed, overstimulated, constantly adapting. And when they look at their spending, they often see the result of that mental erosion, even if they never connect the two. This is one of the most dangerous silent tariffs because it follows you everywhere. It affects every decision. And it ensures that even when prices seem outrageous, resistance feels harder than acceptance. At some point during the trip, something unsettling happens. The prices stop shocking you. What once felt excessive begins to feel expected. This is not adaptation. It is normalization. And normalization is one of New York's most powerful silent tariffs, because once visitors accept inflated costs as just how it is, the system no longer needs to hide. The city trains acceptance through repetition. You overpay once and feel irritation. You overpay again and feel resignation. By the third or fourth time, you stop reacting entirely. The expense becomes background noise, folded into the story you tell yourself about being in New York. You begin defending the prices without realizing it. You say things like, "It's New York," or "Everything is expensive here," as if that explanation ends the conversation. This collective acceptance is crucial. It removes friction. When millions of visitors internalize the idea that overpaying is normal, the city does not need to justify itself. Businesses do not need to explain fees. Services do not need to improve. The system sustains itself through silence and repetition. What makes this especially effective is social reinforcement. You look around and see everyone else paying the same prices. No one protests, no one pauses, no one seems surprised. That shared behavior sends a powerful signal to the brain. If everyone accepts this, resistance must be pointless. And so you adapt, not because it makes sense, but because it feels socially safer. Media and culture reinforce this further. Travel content rarely breaks the illusion. Complaints are framed as weakness or poor planning. High costs are reframed as proof of value, exclusivity, or status. Paying more becomes part of the identity of having been there. And once cost becomes identity, criticism becomes taboo. This normalization extends beyond money. Long lines feel normal. Noise feels normal. Stress feels normal. Discomfort feels normal. And when discomfort is normalized, people stop asking whether it should exist at all. The city benefits from this deeply because questioning is the only real threat to an extractive system. The most troubling part is that visitors often carry this mindset home. They remember New York as intense but meaningful, expensive but worth it. They tell others to expect the same. In doing so, they help recruit the next wave of acceptance. The system does not need marketing alone, it uses memory. By the time the trip ends, many visitors feel a vague sense of relief. Relief to leave, relief to rest, relief to stop paying. But they rarely connect that relief to the normalization they endured. They simply move on, carrying the idea that this is the price of modern urban life. Behind all these silent tariffs sits a deeper structure that most visitors never see because it does not feel like exploitation. It feels like necessity. New York presents itself as a wealthy, powerful city, yet it increasingly behaves like a system struggling to sustain itself. And tourism has become one of its most reliable survival mechanisms. The city no longer extracts value only through production or innovation. It extracts through presence, through bodies passing through space, through short stays that tolerate inefficiency and high costs because they are temporary. Visitors absorb prices that residents could never survive long-term, and that imbalance is not a flaw. It is the model. Every silent tariff you have seen so far feeds into this logic. Airports generate revenue not just from flights, but from confusion and urgency. Hotels maximize fees because turnover is constant. Transportation monetizes indecision. Food exploits repetition. Experiences convert emotion into payment. Psychological pressure accelerates all of it. Together, they form an ecosystem that depends on people who will leave before they can fully understand what happened. This is why the city invests so heavily in maintaining the myth. The image of New York must remain powerful, aspirational, iconic. As long as the dream survives, the flow of visitors continues. And as long as visitors continue, the city can postpone confronting its deeper structural problems. Aging infrastructure, extreme inequality, declining quality of life, rising operational costs. Tourism becomes a buffer. It absorbs pressure that would otherwise fall entirely on residents. Instead of fixing systems, the city charges around them. Instead of improving efficiency, it monetizes friction. Visitors unknowingly subsidize dysfunction, paying for a version of the city that residents are slowly being priced out of. What makes this arrangement so effective is that it feels invisible to everyone involved. Visitors feel drained but move on. Residents feel trapped but adapt. Institutions remain silent because the money keeps flowing. No single group feels responsible for questioning the system, and so the system persists. This is not unique to New York, but New York perfects it. The city has turned tourism into an economic stabilizer that hides decay rather than repairing it. And the more pressure the city faces, the more aggressively it leans into extraction, because it has learned that short-term visitors will always absorb more than long-term residents can. Most visitors only understand what happened when it is already over. The trip ends, the photos are saved, the excitement fades, and then the numbers appear, laid out calmly on a credit card statement. That is the moment when the illusion finally cracks. Not in the city, not during the experience, but afterward, when distance allows clarity. This realization is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. You scroll, you pause. You try to remember what certain charges were for. Airport rides, small fees, meals that felt ordinary, short trips that cost too much, services you barely noticed agreeing to. Nothing stands out as a mistake, and yet the total feels disproportionate to the memory. That gap is the final silent tariff, the delay between experience and understanding. New York relies on this delay because awareness that comes too late cannot change behavior. By the time you recognize the pattern, you are already gone. The city does not need your satisfaction. It only needs your acceptance while you are there. This is why so many people describe New York in contradictions. Incredible but exhausting. Iconic but stressful. Worth it but overwhelming. These contradictions protect the myth. They prevent a clear conclusion. They keep the story emotionally complex instead of structurally critical. What disappears in this ambiguity is the question that matters most. Should a city require this level of financial and psychological tolerance to be experienced at all? Should access to culture, movement, food, rest, and basic dignity feel like constant negotiation? Or has this model simply been normalized long enough that we stopped asking? The danger is not just personal overspending. It is what this model represents for modern cities everywhere. New York is not an exception anymore. It is a prototype. Other cities watch it, imitate it, adopt its methods quietly. Tourism-driven extraction, fee fragmentation, emotional monetization, psychological pressure as revenue. When people accept this in New York, they help legitimize it globally. The silent tariffs spread because they work, and because most people only understand them after the damage is done. This is the real price of the trip. Not just money lost, but awareness delayed. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. If you stayed until the end of this video, it means you felt something shift. That moment of recognition matters. New York only works like this because most people never slow down enough to question the system behind the experience. By watching all the way through, you already did what most visitors never do. You paid attention. If this analysis helped you see the city differently, subscribe to the channel. This space exists to break urban illusions, expose hidden costs, and explain what modern cities quietly take from people while selling the idea of success. A simple subscription helps this kind of content reach more people who are feeling the same pressure but cannot explain it yet. Leave a like if this video gave you clarity instead of hype. And if you want to actively take part in this conversation, leave a comment with the phrase, "I see the real price now." That comment tells the algorithm and other viewers that this is not just another travel video. It is a reality check. Now stay here and watch the next video appearing on your screen. It continues exactly where this one leaves off, exploring how cities like New York are reshaping daily life in ways most people never notice.